Hello, I'm Julie Powell, and I am a doctoral graduate of Eastern Michigan University, and I am here to present my dissertation of Women's Access to the Superintendency, Pathways from the Elementary Ranks. For many years now, there's been an interest in women superintendents because throughout history, there has not been as many women superintendents as males. And that's really not something that's new news. The situation has gotten better. As you can see from the slide, there has been an increase in women superintendents in the past 20 years. But women still are underrepresented. It will take a very long time for women to become proportionally represented, which is my interest in this study. The problem, really, Chase and Bell put it clearly when they say that there's a differential access to opportunities for women. Gatekeepers are predominantly white men. There's all through history, there's been mostly a white male access to the superintendency. There's been a lot of research about this. There's a lot of traditional backgrounds, the most traditional background being a male principal then can be elevated to a superintendency, and generally principals from secondary backgrounds. That really became the impetus for my research. I wanted to study people that began their career as a superintendent from the elementary ranks. So my purpose was really to better understand the experiences of women for a specific group of 6 women in Michigan who started in an elementary career path and aspired and became a superintendent. The significance of the study is strong because as time goes on, there is a need for qualified superintendents. There's a need to reconceptualize the role. There's been a lot of changes in legislation and other things, and we need strong superintendents. The theoretical frameworks that I've used in this study are expectation states theory, a lot of Ridgway's work. It's based on the belief that expectations and assumptions are formed early and are based on a cultural consensus. And once these status beliefs are formed, they're not easy to change. They hold up for long periods of time. Examples would be things like females make better elementary teachers because they're more nurturing. If that is the status belief, then females in future years grow up believing that. Just like high school principals are more ready to be superintendents than elementary principals. If that's an overarching feeling and belief, then that is what is reproduced over time. And there's legitimacy to want to maintain that status quo. I also used feminist post-structuralism as a secondary status belief because that's been based on the belief that women have not been served as well as middle and upper class white males who've traditionally held the most power. It's a feminist position, but it's also based on that gender and power permeate all spheres of life, and that's very big in how people are perceived and the careers they see themselves doing. So my central research question was simply, what can we learn from the lived experience of women who came from a background as elementary educators and advanced to the superintendency in a variety of district contexts within Michigan's traditional public school systems? I chose 6 women who are currently superintendents in Michigan who all began their careers as elementary principals. I have 2 women from a rural setting, 2 from an urban, and 2 from suburban districts. All 6 women have been hired to the superintendency within the last 5 years, and I only use traditional K-12 public schools for my sample. Obviously, a limitation would be, were the women I interviewed telling me the whole story? Would they be forthcoming? Would they feel comfortable talking to me? And I had to pay attention to my own potential bias as someone who comes from an elementary background also and who has aspired to be a superintendent as well. The literature is really pretty clear. The male pathway has been shorter and more direct. There's been a stereotypical image that females are soft. There's a general age of superintendents being in their mid-50s. There's also a lot of the literature will talk about gatekeepers, and that those gatekeepers are the people that are usually search firm consultants and who run school board searches for superintendents. They are typically retired white male superintendents themselves, so they already have a network established. They already have a presence in the area, usually geographically, and so they often fill their roles with people like themselves. There's a lot of literature out there on the barriers that women experience, such as lack of mobility, lack of networks, lack of political know-how, lack of mentoring. A perception by school boards that women may not be as good at budget and finances. There's much research that supports the hard road for superintendents, barriers by women. This was a qualitative research design. It was a constructivist worldview, an interpretive approach. I also recognize that my own background shapes my interpretation when I interact with others. I used a semi-structured, open-ended interview approach, and I used Merriam's multiple case study, considering each case as a single bounded unit, and then using the sampling of all of them to create some common understanding. In the data collection, I used open-ended face-to-face interviews. I used a purposeful sampling approach where I asked all the women superintendents in Michigan to be part of my study who fit the criteria. When the interviews were conducted, I taped and transcribed them and verified that I heard what through each person reading that thing that I wrote and deciding if they believed that I was correct. Each case was written as a portrait, and then when these rich, thick descriptions were put together, there was a cross-analysis conducted and themes were identified. Cindy comes from a rural district. She came at a time where women superintendents were plentiful. There were 7 or 8 women superintendents at various times in her career and at the ISD level as well. She had a very strong male mentor. Each new position she got, she would kind of make a deal that if she didn't like it, she could go back. She said she consciously learned from every superintendent she worked for. Debbie has a doctorate. She received growing frustration through her principalship that male principals and males around her were getting stipends for doing some of the same jobs she was doing, yet she was not getting paid for those roles. She felt like she had no chance in central office. She really had a lot of personal and experiences in her district where she saw that things were not always fair for both men and women. Gladys came from an urban district. She is a first-generation college student and received her doctorate as well. She's very resilient. She followed her superintendents to other districts in her career paths as she has moved up herself. Helen was in a suburban district and felt as though every time she moved up from a teacher to a principal to the next thing, she took action because she was bored or because she wanted an increased challenge. She also had a very specific issue in her district where she felt that she was very, very much faced male-female issues on her Board of Education. Carrie also comes from an urban district, a very depressed city. There's lots of loss of enrollment and loss of jobs, lots of turnover. She never had a mentor. In fact, she told me that you have to be tough without emotion. It's a man's world. And the reason that she became a superintendent is to stop the inevitable turnover that was going on in her district. She felt as though if she was going to have one more superintendent, it might as well be her. Leslie came from a suburban small district. She really sensed and felt a camaraderie between other females when she was applying to be a principal. And then up from there, she said that she also received negative treatment from a male superintendent when she was doing some assistant superintendent work. She's very interested in female networking and how women can help each other in superintendent roles. As all 6 studies were written up and some themes emerged that are worthy. One was that all subjects got initiated to the idea of obtaining administrative positions through an external event or a person of influence who instilled some type of belief in them. None of my 6 superintendents even wanted to be a principal, let alone a superintendent. They were happy being teachers. They did not plan their careers. They did not have conversations about a career path. They simply were noted by somebody and encouraged to pursue an opportunity. Also, another strong theme was that all of them considered their elementary backgrounds actually as an advantage to their beliefs or strengths as a leader. Some were more explicit about that than others, but they felt that they were very good at building relationships, that they had a very solid understanding K-12, that they had a fresh perspective, and they did feel some bias against elementary backgrounds, but from others that might have perceived them that way, but they personally saw it as a positive. A third theme would be that they all raised the issue of the challenge of relating to secondary teachers, that there was a huge learning curve around scheduling and staffing and learning a secondary climate and culture to be a successful superintendent. And so because these women did not have that experience coming into the superintendency, they felt as though they were a bit handicapped and had to make a purposeful plan on what to do to learn those skills, that they had to earn credibility with high school staffs, and that there is a different type of teacher in secondary than there is elementary, and that they needed to make headway on that. There was also the fourth theme that in agreeing to be a superintendent, there was a significant draw to a home district or a region with family ties. I had 2 participants that lived near homes. I had 2 that left to work in other places but returned back to their home. One spent her entire career pretty much in one area until she moved to take care of an aging parent. One spent her whole career living in the area. These women were not real travelers or the types to want to be far from home. So the relevant findings are that obtaining a superintendency was more challenging in some regions of Michigan than in others, based on the district, county, or region's experience. When a precedent was set, it seemed less out of place, and the women felt that way. I can relate because in the county that I have worked in, there's been 2 female superintendents at one time out of 21 ever, and most of the time there's less than that. So I experienced in my own personal situation very few female superintendents. A couple of my people were in areas geographically where there were more. Also, 4 of my 6 are serving as their first female superintendents ever in their respective districts. All of my women are over the age of 50. Mentoring was extremely important. Those who had strong mentors spoke fondly and even tearfully about them. Mentors can be male or female as well. Leslie spoke of gratefulness about a female principal group. All believe in mentorship and want to be strong mentors for others. There were also a couple of contradictions. There were contradicting feelings about whether or not a woman, especially those from elementary, needed to be tough or not. Helen made the comment that men are more assertive. You got to be able to fit in, talk sports. Carrie said you can't be emotional. You have to be objective. You have to be tough. Leslie said you need to be collaborative. You need to be caring. So there was, every one of my 6 participants kind of had a take about how tough you had to be or not. My conclusions would be that women seeking a superintendency confront challenges that men do not have to acknowledge with or which men do not have to deal. I also noted that feminist post-structuralism suggests we grow up with a discourse society hands us that shapes our practices and beliefs, especially about women's place in society and within social systems. In my study, the role of mentors and the influence of those mentors shaped each woman's status beliefs about themselves and their ability to move to higher positions. So I do believe much can be learned from studying the shared experience of others. So the bottom line is, what did we learn? What did we learn from the lived experience of women who came from a background as elementary educators and advanced to the superintendent in a variety of district contexts within Michigan's public schools? What we learned was to actually apply for a superintendency. There were variables either controlled by these women or out of their control that inevitably lined up for each of them. Kind of a stars lining up. How these women handled the variables really made the difference. For one participant, it was a 5-year period of superintendent turnover. That were the variables in her situation. For another, it was moving close to a 90-year-old mother combined with frustration in the current district. For another, it was a health scare. The point is that whatever it is, these women did something purposeful when this happened. They chose not to be victims. They chose to be strong and to exhibit leadership. Also, we learned that none of these women engaged in career planning. Women just seemed to let life happen. They each had a trigger at some point, but before that, they did not plan purposefully for a career. We also learned that obtaining a superintendency was more challenging in some regions of Michigan than others. It leads to the question, are women's career options limited in some areas? Expectation states theory does support this because it draws a straight line to the notion that what any of us see and experience growing up is where we see ourselves later. We also learned that mentor relationships, whether they are male or female, provide valuable support for women. I can certainly attest to that in my own life. I have had both male and female mentors, and I value that tremendously. For implications for women leaders is that they have to be proactive and purposeful in career planning. They need to seek strong mentors. They need to take initiative to meet with other women superintendents and learn as much as possible about the search and selection process. And district leaders really need to identify women early and develop programs for them to be potential superintendents. They need to help create those mentorship opportunities and advancement type networks. The recommendations I have for university programs would be to engage in purposeful discourse about gender issues and provide support and development for aspiring women. That could take the look as reviewing the curriculum, choosing research on female issues, and making sure female issues are part of the curriculum and purposefully taught. They can address perceived gaps for females in areas of finance and budget, politics, and secondary school cultures. Those things came up quite a bit by all 6 of my women as an area that they needed help in. So university prep programs could address that need right from the start. And also, university programs can ensure a balanced faculty, making sure that females are teaching as many superintendent prep courses as males are teaching. For search firms and school boards, I would say seeking training in gender bias would be important, as well as being considerate of bias towards secondary candidates over elementary candidates. And recommendations for further study include a study of superintendency preparation programs to discern if these programs are encouraging and promoting of women. We know there are more women today in higher ed than men in many programs. Have we adjusted for that at the higher ed level? Have we paid attention to the demographics of the classes that we are teaching? We can set up networks as part of conferences and ISDs, and academe really is the perfect place to open discussions about purposeful inclusion of women's leadership. As a final comments, I would say that I live in a county that favors women less than I wanted to believe prior to starting this research. My own experiences as a candidate exemplified bias and lots of politics, but few will really say it outright. That was from my own search process, watching, and some of my own experiences. What surprised me was how unplanned women are, because I see myself differently. I see that I've made a lot of decisions to purposely change my career and add to my career. It surprises me that the 6 women in my study did not do that. And the mentorship piece is something I've puzzled through, because women seem to struggle to set this up for themselves. Some women even sabotage other women. So there's more meaning for me in my life, and more reflection and more research, I think, that could take place in the area of mentorship. Thank you.